All right. Well, thank you for bearing with me in all of the setup stuff. If I seem distracted again, it's just because of the multiple things we got to juggle. But once we get started, hopefully it'll be a little smooth sailing. This is our second book club. If you missed the first one, the first book club we did was Christopher Wright's The Mission of God. We did that back in January for 12 weeks, and that's its own playlist on the channel on Disciple Dojo. So if you want to check that out, maybe after this, you're like, oh, what should I read next? And there's time before we do our next one, then check out Mission of God Book Club. Some of you were in it. I see a couple of tiny little thumbnails that are familiar from that book club. So those of you that jumped into this one, I'm really glad to see you back. And we're doing the first of C.S. Lewis's Ransom Trilogy. How many of you have your book? If you have your book, hold it up. Even if it's not this book, if you have, all right, perfect. Okay, we're going to be making reference to this later tonight. The way tonight's going to work is there's so much ground to cover, like as what scholars call prolegomenon. So before you set off on a study, things to know that are kind of like priming the pump, giving you the lay of the land, so that as you read, my goal for this study is for us to read through the Ransom Trilogy, and particularly Out of the Silent Planet. We haven't scheduled Paralandra or That Hideous Strength yet. We're just going to see how this first one goes, and then that'll determine the later reading schedule. But the goal is to read through the whole Ransom Trilogy, and not just read it as a story, but also to appreciate it as literature. I think it is the most underrated of all of C.S. Lewis's work. It's my favorite of all of his work. I like it better than Narnia. I like it better than Screwtape. I like it better than Mere Christianity. I like it better. It's just, I think it's his best writing. And my goal, I won't be able to convince everybody of that, and I don't want to. Everybody has their own favorites. But my goal is for us to come away with a much greater appreciation for this work. This is some of his earliest work. These were some of the earliest books that he wrote. And I think they've just kind of been in the shadow for a long time. A lot of people, the most common response when I say, have you read Lewis's Ransom Trilogy or Space Trilogy or Cosmic Trilogy, is people say, I didn't even know he wrote that. I never heard of that. So one of my goals is to overturn that in our Christian culture. And get people to realize, man, he wrote some amazing stuff. Another goal is also to use the Ransom Trilogy as a lens through which to view his other writings, because he didn't put it down after he finished That Hideous Strength. The rest of his writings all contain the elements and the worldview that he exhibits, that he first introduces readers to in the Ransom Trilogy. So that's a second goal I have, is to show how the Ransom Trilogy basically provides an atlas to the rest of Lewis's work, and a lot of it goes unnoticed. So as a result, we're going to be keying in on Out of the Silent Planet tonight. The way tonight's going to work is tonight's going to be this first session is going to be the most lecture-y of all of our sessions, just because there's so much initial material. So it's kind of like the first half of tonight is getting a lay of the land, and that means a background on what went into this trilogy and what Lewis is trying to do and how it's been received. And then we're going to introduce some themes. And then we're going to actually talk about, you should have read by tonight, chapters 1 and 2. If you read Mission of God and you got through that series, this should be a cakewalk in terms of amount of reading. The chapters are very short. They're very punchy. They leave there. A lot of times there's cliffhanger endings, and they're easy reading. And so I would encourage you, you've already read chapter 1 and 2, and then the reading for next week, as you're doing that, don't be afraid to go back and reread 1 and 2, or revisit at least based on some of the stuff we talk about. Because the way typically in book clubs, the beauty of it is you read it on your own, and you come with what you picked up and what you want to talk about and what you want to discuss. And then you hear things that other people picked up and what other people want to discuss. And then ideally you should go back and reread with an eye out for those things. And that's how we all increase one another's appreciation for great literature. And that's any great literature, not just Lewis's. I'm just skimming the chat real quick to make sure I'm not missing anything.
There is a question.
Yes.
Was this the beginning of science fiction?
Yes, no, this was not. Science fiction goes back a long way. Some people, I think, have said Mary Shelley, Frankenstein is considered the first science fiction novel. Certainly Jules Verne. Lewis read a lot of science fiction, and that's actually what we're going to talk about to get started. Let me go back to screen sharing. So let's start off by talking about why do I call this the Ransom Trilogy? When it says right on the front, at least my copy, it says the Space Trilogy. That's pretty clear. So why do I keep calling it the Ransom Trilogy? Well, when it was first published, again, these were published, Out of the Silent Planet was just published its own thing. Then the other books were published and added to it. But originally, when they were published all together, it was called the Cosmic Trilogy in some publications. And then it became known as the Space Trilogy. And honestly, I think it became known as the Space Trilogy just because that's easy for people to keep in mind. Oh, he goes to space, it's the Space Trilogy. So but why do I call it the Ransom Trilogy? Because C.S. Lewis himself, he says in the book, one of his goals is to get people to stop seeing or stop thinking about it as space. The word space. He wants to undermine that notion completely. He actually says it. It's not me reading into this. And C.S. Lewis scholars, for that reason, you will hear a lot of them call it the Ransom Trilogy, the Cosmic Trilogy, something like that. But it's sort of like, you know how publishers are really annoying sometimes. They publish the Chronicles of Narnia in the wrong order. If you saw our episode with Michael Ward, he and I talked about this. He's probably one of the, if not the foremost C.S. Lewis scholar, or certainly literary critic. We talked about the order that publishers insist on for the Narnia Chronicles is the wrong order. It's based on a letter that Lewis responded to a little kid years later. And the kid said, I think you should read them in chronological order. And Lewis said, I think that's a fine idea because he's being nice and writing a kid back. If he even wrote it, Warney wrote a lot of his letters, so it might have been something that Warney typed off and sent. Regardless, publishers have taken that and have ruined the Narnia series by publishing The Magician's Nephew first, when clearly in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that's where you meet Aslan for the first time. And they even says, Aslan, that name doesn't mean anything to you, but, and then it goes on to introduce him. Well, if you've read The Magician's Nephew, you already know who Aslan is. You already know the backstory. So that's another rant for another time. But the point is, publishers don't always get it right. In the case of the Narnia publication order, they get it wrong. In the case of the Space Trilogy, I would argue that they named it the wrong thing based on something. Lewis never named it that, to my knowledge. Let's talk about first, and I'll have to bear this out as we go, but Lewis had a lot to say on bad science fiction. He wrote in his essay, so this book, I just did a review on Disciple Dojo of this book. This book is incredibly hard to find. It's out of print, paperbacks. This is a used paperback. They go for over $100 on Amazon. It is not available on Kindle for some inexplicable reason. But this essay collection, the good news is it is available on audible.com for only $1. But just the written version, it's very hard to find. In his essay collection, there is an essay. It's one of the early ones. This is his essays on literature, philosophy, and short stories. And there's an essay, it's essay number 7 on science fiction. And he writes in this essay, he talks all about science fiction and what makes for good science fiction and what makes for bad science fiction. And he's very upfront about saying science fiction in Lewis's day, early 20th century, it got a bad rap. It was seen as pulpy. It was seen as unsophisticated. It's not what Oxford Dons were supposed to be reading. It's lowbrow. It was printed on pulpy paper. That's why it became known as pulp science fiction. It was meant to be read by shoe shiners and bus drivers and factory workers and people. It wasn't considered intelligent. And Lewis was like, that's ridiculous. Science fiction is really good. But the problem is, for all the good science fiction, there's even more bad science fiction out there. And so in that essay, he talks about, you can read it online. Any of his essays you can find online. Just Google on science fiction if you want to read it. But he talks about what makes for good science fiction and what makes for bad science fiction. And he actually wrote a poem about it. In his book Poems, this is still in print. You can find this anywhere. And if you don't like poetry tonight, grit your teeth, because we're going to do a deep dive into some of C.S. Lewis's poetry. But it's because it's going to lay the groundwork for everything that we're going to read in this adventure, including his thoughts on bad science fiction. So he says in this, his poem is called An Expostulation. And then the subtitle is Against Too Many Writers of Science Fiction. And so it's a short poem. It's only 2 lines or 2 screens. But this is his critique. Why did you lure us on like this, light year on light year through the abyss, building as though we cared for size, empires that cover galaxies, if at the journey's end we find the same old stuff we left behind? Well-worn Tellurian stories, and Tellurian just means earthly, of crooks, spies, conspirators, or love, whose setting might as well have been the Bronx, Montmartre, or Bethnal Green. Why should I leave this green-floored cell, talking about the world he lives in, why should I leave this green-floored cell roofed with blue air in which we dwell, unless outside its guarded gates long, long desired the unearthly waits? Strangeness that moves us more than fear, beauty that stabs with tingling spear. And while whoever I'm picking up mutes themselves, take a note of this. Beauty that stabs with tingling spear. This word, tingling, is very important. We're going to come back to it. Or wonder laying on one's heart, that fingertip at which we start, as if some thought too swift and shy for reason's grasp had just gone by. So, for those that don't like poetry, what Lewis is doing in this is basically poetically expressing what he said in his essay on science fiction. In his essay on science fiction, he said his least favorite type of science fiction stories are the stories that take people into another world for no reason whatsoever. In other words, he's heavily critical of a science fiction story that could have taken place on Earth. It's a crime story, it's an intrigue, it's a thriller, it's a personal study, it's something, but they just decided to put it on another planet. They just decided to make a love story that could have taken place in the south of France or middle America or anywhere else. But they just said, oh, we're going to stick it on another planet and use weird names, and that's just what it's going to be. And Lewis admits in his article, he says, that's bad science fiction. The whole point of science fiction is to take us to another place, not to just use another setting to tell a boring, normal story. So he's very particular on this, to the point that you can see he wrote a poem about it. He thought about this a lot. And so that's what he's trying to not do in the Ransom Trilogy. And of course, whether he succeeds or not, that'll be up to the reader. But you notice at the beginning of, if you note the beginning of the, where is it? It's the, so after the foreword by Tolkien, the preface, this is before the pages are even numbered, but at the beginning, at the preface, you notice that he makes this little remark here. Lewis says, the author would be sorry if any reader supposed he was too stupid to have enjoyed Mr. H.G. Wells's fantasies, or too ungrateful to acknowledge his debt to them. And this is the thing to remember about Lewis. He read H.G. Wells. He liked H.G. Wells. He thought H.G. Wells' stories were brilliant. He just thought the worldview that they were teaching, the atheistic, materialistic, xenophobic worldview, War of the Worlds and Time Machine, and that he just thought it was a terrible worldview. But he thought the actual writing was excellent, and that Wells represented the best of science fiction writing with the worst of philosophical religious worldview. And so Lewis set out to write in Out of the Silent Planet and then Paralandra, and especially That Hideous Strength. He set out to write basically an anti-H.G. Wells. David Downing, in his book, this is the book Planets in Peril. This is a great little study. It's not too thick. It's like 150 pages. It's a critical study of, notice what it calls it, a critical study of C.S. Lewis's Ransom Trilogy. That's not accidental. In the Ransom Trilogy study, Downing says, Lewis's reading of H.G. Wells planted firmly in his boyish imagination the vastness and cold of space, the littleness of man. This is what Wells, if you read Wells, or most sci-fi, space is huge. It's mind-bogglingly huge. We really can't wrap our mind around it if we had to really sit and think about it. I mean, the fact that like Voyager, that was sent out before I was born, or was I born? Yeah, it was before I was born. Voyager was launched, I think. I was born in 78. I think they launched Voyager before 78. Anyway, Voyager was launched, and it's been traveling multiple times faster than a bullet from a rifle for half a century. And it is one light day away from us. That's as far as it's gotten, is how far light travels in 24 hours. That's how far, the fastest thing humanity's ever created, that's gone the farthest of anything humanity's created. It's like we can't even begin to wrap our minds around the vastness of space. And Lewis, they knew that even before the space age. They knew how vast it was. So Downing says, this is, of course, the materialist myth that Lewis deliberately seeks to subvert in the trilogy. What Lewis is trying to subvert is not the fact of how big space is. He's trying to subvert the philosophical and religious implications that materialism shoehorns into the vastness of space. That's what he's trying to do throughout the trilogy. And he says this, I'm not going to do I'm going to try as hard as I can not to do spoilers in these sessions, because some of you are reading this for the first time, and there are some amazing aha moments, and I don't want to ruin those. And I don't want you guys to ruin them for each other either. So when we start discussing, if you've read ahead, be mindful. Don't ruin anything for anyone else. But at the end of the book, after the whole story's been written, there's like a postscript, and it is, for those of you that have already read the book, it is on page, which page is it? Hold on a second. It's right at, yeah. So it's at the end, 22. In this edition, it starts on page 139. And this is, I'm just going to, you can see it on the PowerPoint, but that's all it is. The PowerPoint is of this section of the page here. But this is what he says. The two characters, so Lewis's character, Lewis writes himself as the one who's listening to Ransom recount his story. So Lewis is in the Space Trilogy, the Ransom Trilogy. He's Ransom's chronicler. The Lewis character and the Ransom character are talking, and the Ransom character says, in encouraging the writing of this account, what we need for the moment is not so much a body of belief as a body of people familiarized with certain ideas. If we could even affect in 1% of our readers, and that period is there in the original, because percent is an abbreviation, good English writing, but if we could even affect in 1% of our readers a changeover from the conception of space to the conception of heaven, we should have made a beginning. So this is why I say Lewis did not. This is why I don't call this. I mean, unless I'm just speaking colloquially, this should not be called the Space Trilogy. It undermines everything that Ransom himself wants readers to come away with. He does not want them to have the conception of space. He wants them to have the conception of heaven. And that's a huge, huge part, not just of this book, but of the rest of Lewis's writings, including Narnia. So we'll pause here for just a second. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so I can look. I can't follow the chat, but if anybody does have any questions or thought or comment before we go further, I want to briefly allow for that and take a sip of water. And you can just unmute and ask. You don't have to. I mean, we've got time. Sadie says, first timer. I've never even heard of this series until this club. Yes, I'm excited. I'm excited for you. I wish I could go back and reread these again for the first time. David says, I can't hear you over chatter. Anybody else having that problem? I hope not.
That issue was resolved.
Oh, okay. Good. All right. Yep, go ahead.
I have one. I'm sorry, I missed the title of that first book you mentioned, the one that's not available, that very first one.
Yeah.
Couldn't see it on the.
This is CS
His essay okay.
collection, but there's two. This is specifically literature, philosophy, and short stories. This one is the green cover. You can't really see it on my camera here, but it's a green cover. There's one that's a blue cover, and Lewis is looking out a window. That is his essay collection, volume 2, and that's on Christianity, religion, and church, something like that. So they're two. They're about the same width. That one you can find. That one's still in print. You can get it for like $25 on Amazon. This one is the one that if you find this anywhere in a used bookstore, get it. You can find this for less than $100. Pick it up. It's well worth it. And if you don't think so, send it to me and I'll reimburse you. This is a great collection. My aunt gave me this for my birthday this year. I don't know where she got it, and I don't even want to know how much she paid for it, but she's awesome, and I was thankful.
Thank you.
But again, to reiterate, that if you do the, I said this in that episode, but I know you guys don't catch every Disciple Dojo episode. So let me just show you. This is the Audible version. It's called C.S. Lewis Essay Collection and Other Short Pieces. It's edited by Leslie Walmsley. That's who edited both of those volumes. This is both of those volumes together. The problem is you can't navigate it because the essays aren't titled. They just have chapter numbers. It's the most annoying thing out there. But online, and catch the video review, I showed online, there's a website where someone has given, okay, this is what these chapters are for the Audible version. They've made like a spreadsheet. And so you can have access to it pretty easily. It's just the audio version. So if you want to read and take notes, obviously that's a little trickier. But almost all of his essays, if you just Google the title of the essay, you can find it somewhere because they were all published in various places. And, in this magazine, in this journal, in this newspaper discussion, in this whatever. And then they were collected and collated and published much later. So copyright is maddening and it's hard to track stuff down, but you can find anything pretty much by Googling it. I don't see any other questions. If there are any, feel free to unmute and just interrupt me, but otherwise.
I have a question. Did you say that it was that Lewis originally called it the Cosmic Trilogy?
No, it was originally published in one of the versions that when they published it together, there was one version that published it as the Cosmic Trilogy. Hold on, I'll pull the PowerPoint back up. This collection, I don't even know who the publisher is, but it was published like this. This is the one that we have right now or similar. the new version, but it was at one time published as the Cosmic Trilogy.
So what did he name it?
I don't think he named it. I think it was just 3 books.
Okay.
I think it was Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and That Hideous Strength. I don't think in his lifetime it was ever published in a 1-volume edition. I could be wrong on that, but if he has referred to them all by name, I don't know. I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, so let's talk about story. This is one of the things that I know some people, I don't understand them, but I know there are some people that don't like reading fiction. And I think it's just because I grew up reading comic books, and I grew up reading, like my mom took us to the library every week, and we had to pick out at least 3 to 5 books, and we had to read them. And then the next week we had to go back. Like I grew up in a reading family. And so for some people, and I get all this, of course, if there's reading disabilities, learning disabilities, visual impairment, I'm not talking about that. People that deal with those issues, that's a whole different thing. And there's zero condemnation, or I'm not throwing shade at it, but I'm just talking about people that can read perfectly well, but they just don't like to. That's what I don't understand. I can't really relate to this. It's kind of like people that love math. I can't relate. I know you exist, and I'm thankful for you. I just don't understand what it's like to be you. But there are some people that are that way about stories. And I think part of it is early on, we read a lot of, or we're exposed to a lot of bad stories, or we're exposed to a lot of stories. And by bad, I just mean boring, uninteresting, unengaging, or we're exposed to things that we have to read. And the moment you tell somebody you have to read something, the likelihood of them enjoying it drops significantly. Fortunately, this was a book, Out of the Silent Planet, was a book that in 9th grade, I was told we have to read. I had a teacher. I went to a public school. I didn't even know it was Christian. She might have gotten in trouble if people had made a big thing about it. But it was a class on literature, and she said, we're going to read and talk about this book, Out of the Silent Planet. I'm forever thankful for Charlotte Eisel at Central High School in 1990, this would have been 91, 92, somewhere in there, that introduced us to this book. Because what it did was it opened the eye. I was a Christian. I was a preacher's kid. I grew up in the church. I got to see the gospel again through new eyes because of this book. And I'm forever thankful for that. This is one of the things, Christiana Hale, this book I mentioned in one of the emails I sent out, Deeper Heaven, or I might have mentioned it on the video I did about this. This book, Deeper Heaven, A Reader's Guide to C.S. Lewis's, note what it says again, Ransom Trilogy. This is one of the best books I've ever read on this series. Downing's book is great. Planets in Peril is great, and she references Planets in Peril. But this book is a phenomenal study. It's written at a popular level. Anybody can read it. I've said the caveat. The foreword is written by Douglas Wilson. Douglas Wilson has become something of a celebrity for all the wrong reasons. We won't get into why he's a terrible person in so many ways to a lot of people, myself included. I won't hide that fact. What I tell people is just ignore the foreword. If you don't like Doug Wilson and his views on women and race and slavery and all this stuff, which are pretty terrible, just ignore that and read the book itself, because the book itself is absolutely phenomenal. And she makes so many good observations, but one of the things that she talks about is why Lewis chose story, why he was so passionate about story as a vehicle for changing the world. He and Tolkien, I mean, two of the literary giants of the 20th century, set out to change the world through stories. And they succeeded. Lewis through Narnia, Tolkien through Middle-earth. Their other works are good and renowned. They both wrote academic works, but their other works are not what changed the world. What changed the world were their stories. So Hale makes observations. She says, good storytelling tells the truth about the way the world is. And that truth will reshape every part of our lives, starting with our imaginations. That's what Lewis is trying to capture, a generation, the imagination of a generation. There's a line, I can't remember who said it, maybe Malcolm Muggeridge or some, I can't remember the person, but they said, let me write the songs of a generation and I don't care who gets to write its laws. If you can capture the imagination of people, you can change people. And Lewis realized that because he had been changed. His imagination had been captured. There's a book called Life on the Silent Planet. I just read this book a couple of months ago. It's very new. It's a collection of essays about, here it is again, essays on Christian living from C.S. Lewis's Ransom Trilogy. And this is by people like Michael Ward, Holly Ordway, Louis Marcos, Joe Rigney. These are all Lewis scholars, literary scholars, historians, and it's a collection of essays on each of the 3 books in the Ransom series. But in the introduction, Rhys Laverty, who's the editor, he said, "The Great Divorce was my favorite Lewis work long before I knew anything about Dante." You know, like The Great Divorce is just a retelling of the Divine Comedy. It's Lewis's attempt to modernize Dante within his worldview. And Laverty says, I loved it. He loved it long before he ever knew who Dante was. And the general public enjoyed the Chronicles of Narnia for decades before Michael Ward cracked the Narnia code. Michael Ward, if you saw the episode, he was on the channel. He's the scholar who cracked the code, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. He says, yet the Ransom Trilogy places its allusions and references somewhat closer to the surface than either of these, and so perhaps requires something more of a working knowledge to be entered into. So the Ransom Trilogy, this is harder for a lot of people to get into because the allusions and the imagery are closer to the surface. They're more overt in this trilogy than they are in Narnia. I mean, it took decades for people to find the code in Narnia. They're a lot more transparent. They're more on the nose in this series. But Laverty goes on to say, one could scarcely have designed a more retroactively prophetic set of novels for our day if they had tried. This is what we're going to find as we read the Ransom Trilogy, is just how applicable it is to 21st century Western culture. It's stunning how prescient Lewis was in so many ways. Let's talk about Lewis's literary mission. And this is going to be a chunk of, like I said, this first gathering is going to be more lecture-y than what we're going to be doing throughout. So just bear with us. This is all laying the groundwork. But before we jump into this next part, are there any questions? I'm just looking at the chat real quick. If there are any questions, feel free to shout them out. Oh, Loretta posted a link to the essay. Yes, thank you for doing that. And in future sessions, I will have, if I have links and things, I'll try to make those available and drop them in the chat. Okay, let's jump into Lewis's literary mission. To summarize what he's trying to do in the Ransom Trilogy, this is how I phrased it. His goal is re-enchantment by recovering the heavens. That's what he wants to do. He is deliberately setting out to re-enchant the imagination of modern readers. So, in one of the last books he ever wrote, his book, The Discarded Image, this is the original cover. It's got a new cover now, but it's a phenomenal book. The subtitle will put people off. An Introduction to Medieval and Renaissance Literature. You read that and you're like, well, I don't want to read this. That's boring. I don't care about medieval and Renaissance literature. That's the unfortunate part of the subtitle. The entire book is all about how medieval thinkers ancient to medieval. I shouldn't say medieval only. Ancient, like the ancient Greeks, the Christians in the early ages, the medieval thinkers, how they viewed the cosmos, how they viewed the world, and then how that informed medieval and Renaissance literature. So that's what he's working at. But this was a course that he taught at Oxford and then later at Cambridge. And at Oxford and Cambridge in UK universities, you don't have to go to lectures. The main bulk of your learning happens in your reading sessions with your tutors. Lectures are completely optional. And they're kind of a little, you can sort of gauge how popular a professor is by how well attended their lectures are. Many of Lewis's early lectures and some of his other, he would talk about some lectures on certain things in certain classes, maybe 2 or 3 people would be there. And then it would just turn into an informal discussion. Other lectures, they would pack it out. There'd be like 100 people. It just totally depends. And one of Lewis's, he became a very well-attended lecturer in these lectures, his series of lectures that became his work for the discarded image. His class, he was a professor of medieval and Renaissance literature. That's what he taught. And so this is sort of, if you want to understand Lewis's worldview, this is like the end of his life. I think literally it's the last book published before he died. Then this would be where to go. And Lewis's, I'm gonna switch to the Word document here because I can zoom. That's a little bigger, right? You guys can see that. This means yes. This means no. Okay, good. As long as okay, perfect. This is the medieval worldview. This is how, and not even medieval, this is pre-Copernican. This is how people saw the world. These rings of concentric spheres. Have you ever heard the song, the music of the spheres? Have you ever heard that verse from the song? That's what this is referencing. The spheres, the ancients believed that there were these literal spheres that were nested inside of each other, like Russian nesting dolls. And the spheres were completely clear. They were crystalline. They were entirely transparent, and the planets were the things that were embedded in those spheres. So it's like, think about a clear globe and you just draw a dot on it and then put another clear globe around that and draw a dot on that and then let them move separately from each other. Behind it, at the end of the spheres, the outer version was the unmoving area, the firmament rather. You can see it right there, firmamenti. The firmament is what the stars were embedded in. So they believed that the stars were their own sphere. They were embedded in a crystalline dome, and all the spheres between the stars and us moved and rotated freely. And then, of course, outside of that, you came to the area where the angels were, and then outside of that was God himself. And so here's a English version, if you prefer. So we are at the center. So you have the earth, then that's where water is on the earth. Then you had air that surrounds it. Then they believed that the third element was fire. That's why they believed fire always goes up, because its fire is going back to where it comes from. When meteors come through, they're fiery, like lightning strikes. That's fire from heaven. So you have the earth, the first element, water, the second element, air, the third element, fire, the fourth element, and then the fifth element would be the quintessence. That would be the thing that binds them all together, or that's outside. And that's where that phrase, the fifth element, comes from, or quintessence. But outside of that, then, the order of the spheres was very specific. The planet comes from the word that means to wander. So when the ancients looked up at the sky, they saw the stars never move. Orion's belt is always Orion's belt. It's never changing. You know, the Scorpio, Cancer, all of the constellations, if you're in the southern hemisphere, the Southern Cross, that stuff never moves. The only things that move are these wanderers, these lights. And sometimes they come, and then sometimes it looks like they're going backwards, and then they keep moving again. So that's why they called them wanderers, because they don't move in perfect. They have what they developed this whole series of epicycles or epicircles, these little, I mean, it was medieval astronomy. They took it very seriously, and they were trying to work from this model. Why do these things wander in the sky? Why don't they move regularly like everything else? But the order is pretty important. You had the heaven of the moon. So the moon was the first thing. Then after the moon was the heaven of Mercury, then the heaven of Venus, then the heaven of the sun. They considered the sun and the moon planets. Then the heaven of Mars, then Jupiter, then Saturn. Then after that was the firmament. And then after that was the primum mobile, the thing that moves everything else. So all movement was directed inward from the outer sphere, the abode of the blessed, as Dante would refer to it. And so everything, the more you went inward, the more you went away from truth and beauty and light and goodness and perfection and God himself. God was outside of everything. God was all around everything. So this was the idea that the ancients had, and it was very sophisticated. I mean, they worked this out over centuries and centuries. Now, of course, Copernicus and others were the first ones to go, you know what? You can explain all this a lot easier if we put the sun at the center. But that is not intuitive. And the people that opposed that the most were not religious people. They were the scientists. The scientists of Copernicus and Galileo's day were the ones who are like, what? No, come on. Everybody knows the earth is at the center. Look down. You're not moving. Look up. That's moving. So it wasn't intuitive, but on our side of history, it seems very intuitive just because that's what we're taught. So anyway, Lewis in The Discarded Image, goes through this model and he shows, he undercuts some popular assumptions. The first assumption is, he says that Earth being the center doesn't mean the ancients thought that Earth was the most important thing. Being at the center wasn't a good thing. Being at the center was, we'll look at it in a minute, it did not mean you were the most important. It actually meant you were the least important. You made the least significance if you're at the center. So that's a thing that we just have this idea, the ancients thought the world revolved around them because they were so important. No, they thought, but because they were so insignificant and that the earth was at the center. One of the key influences for Lewis was Dante. And if you've never read Divine Comedy, I'll show you. I've done a video on this one. This is the edition. This is the translation. It's from the Everyman's Library edition, and it's the translation by Mendelbaum. This is a fantastic. It's a collection of all of the Divine Comedy is 3 books. It's Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. Heaven, Purgatory, and Hell, or Hell, Purgatory, and Heaven. This is all 3 of them together. And the reason that I love this version so much is because it presents it in the poetry, the cantos, the different cantos. And then at the back, it has notes that tell you all of the references that are embedded in each canto. So I literally just read a chapter, a canto a night. I'd read the canto, I'd flip to the back, I'd read the notes. And it was reading this as a fan of Lewis's Ransom Trilogy was so enjoyable because it was like, oh my gosh, that's where he got this from. That's where he got that from. Like it put pieces together that I had never put together. But there are a lot of them in the entire trilogy. Christiane Hale points it out. She says both Dante's Pilgrim and Lewis's Pedestrian are in a dark wood. Like the first chapter you read, it starts out the pedestrian walking in the dark wood. They're of a similar age. The pilgrim, famously in Dante, is midway along the journey of life, meaning he's about halfway through his life, middle age. And the pedestrian is, at the beginning, he notes to say 35 to 40 years of age. That's not insignificant. Lewis is placing Ransom in the role of Dante's pedestrian, or Dante's pilgrim, rather. In image of Dante's Pilgrim, Ransom goes through hell, purgatory, and the deepest heaven, as we'll explore later. We're not going to get into that tonight, but they're in different places. So in Dante, I'm going to skip over because we'll come back to that as we continue to read through. But in Dante begins in Jerusalem and descends into the levels of hell until he gets to where the deepest level of hell, which is where Satan is, and that's the center of the earth. And then they literally climb down Satan's torso. A fun fact, in the Divine Comedy, hell is ice. It's not fire. The deepest hell, the center is actually ice. And Satan is embedded in ice. And so they climb down Satan's torso. And then I jokingly, they come out of Satan's butt. Not really, but they kind of come out the other side, on the other side of the world. Because newsflash, the ancients knew that we live on a globe. Sorry if you're a flat earther, you're wrong, and they've known you've been wrong for thousands of years. They knew that it was a globe. They never believed the earth was flat. And so there was all these questions about what would it be like on the other side of the world? What would happen if you crawled through the center? Well, gravity would switch. And in Dante, they start coming out the other side. So they go through the middle of hell, and then they come out into Mount Purgatory. And then Purgatorio, they climb Mount Purgatory. And then in Paradiso, they leave Virgil, who's Dante's guide, leads him to the top of Mount Purgatory. And then he's taken up into the spheres of the heavens. And one by one, the heavenly spheres in Dante, until he gets to the final, the Empyrean, the place where he comes face to face with God, so to speak. And it was one of Lewis's favorite moments in all of literature. So this whole journey, the thing that's important though about this is Earth, and particularly where we are in the ancients, where they were, is seen as the sewer of the universe. Like all the good stuff is up here. And it all trickles down, down, down. And then the center is Satan himself and hell, where everything is small and cramped and forgotten. So in The Great Divorce, Lewis pictures hell, like while they're in it, it looks huge and sprawling. And then when they get out of hell, they look back and they're like, wait, where were we? And he's like, look down at that tiny little speck. Do you see that little crack? That hell becomes so infinitesimally small that it's eternally irrelevant, basically. So this is the idea that Lewis, he does it in The Great Divorce. He's doing it in the Ransom Trilogy as well. He also does it in Narnia. He wanted to bring this idea back. So Hale points this out. While we moderns think that centrality equates importance, the medievals saw centrality as an indication of unimportance. The center is the lowest point. Therefore, Earth's centrality did not place it in the position of the highest significance, but rather of greatest insignificance. Earth possesses the most central, the very lowest position in the cosmos, and hell is the most central and lowest part of the earth. Hell is the lowest of the low. This is the medieval conception of reality. And so what that does then is when the ancients looked up at the sky, they were looking out into something that was full of wonder. They were looking out into something that made them tingle, that made them, they saw the night sky as an astronomer I heard one time say it was the greatest show on earth in the ancient world. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. It was perfect. It was symmetrical. It was overwhelming. It was the opposite of cold and vast and hostile and dead, which is how modern cosmology thinks of outer space. So that's what Lewis is working against. I mentioned the word tingle. This is important as you're reading the Ransom Trilogy. Our English word tingle, oops, somebody just came in, let me admit them. Our English word tingle comes from the Anglo-Saxon word, and Lewis loved Anglo-Saxon. He and Tolkien were like part of the Anglo-Saxon crew of Oxford. So there are a lot of Anglo-Saxon stuff sprinkled throughout both of their works. The Anglo-Saxon word for star is tingle. So in the Ransom Trilogy, whenever you see the English word tingle, it's often used to describe Ransom's sensations when he either sees the heavens for what they really are, or when he encounters various angelic beings like the Aldila or the Oyoresu. If you're just reading for the first time, you don't know what Aldila and Oyoresu are yet, don't worry, you will. But note the word tingle every time you see it in this book, and look at what's happening when he uses the word. Nothing's accidental. So the word tingling is not merely descriptive. It's appropriate that Ransom feels the effects of his cosmological shift in a particularly cosmological way. His view of the stars has been rewritten, and this is felt in his body as a tingling. We could say a starriness. He has seen the stars for what they are, and he feels it down in his bones. This is what, as you're going to see in the coming chapters, Ransom is as you're reading, we haven't gotten there yet, but as you're reading the chapters that come after this week's reading, keep all of this in mind. It's going to make so much sense. When I first read this as a kid in high school, I thought, and I don't want to do spoilers, but it's called the Space Trilogy, so he's going to go to space. As a kid, I thought, oh, that's so weird. Lewis just didn't know what outer space was like. This was before, this was during the space race. He wrote this in the 30s. This was published in 39. So this was before rockets and people, before anybody, Alan Shepard and Yuri Gagarin and any of those guys had actually been to space. So I always thought, oh, Lewis is just he's just coming up with what people who don't know what space travel is really like might think it's like. And only later did I realize that's not at all what he's doing. What he's doing is saying, how can I recapture what Dante and the ancients, how can I recapture the discarded image and put it into a story that also recognizes modern astronomy and the fact that we aren't the center physically of the universe. How do I reconcile those things? And so that's what he's going to be doing. Keep in mind tingling whenever you see it. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is the big one, this is the Planet Narnia stuff. Let me pause before we get into this real quick. I want to make sure that I'm not just vomiting out information. Are there any questions or anything about any of this so far, or any observations? Do you feel any tingling on your end that you have something that you want to express? If so, now is the time to do.
Would you be able to repeat actually what you said about tingle there? I know it's not accidental, but what else did you say that it was?
Yeah, tingling. Think of it as starriness, basically. The word tingle is the Anglo-Saxon word for star. So whenever Ransom feels tingling, what's going to be happening in the story, he's going to be having an encounter of some sort with the stars or the angelic. Because in the ancient mind, those were the same thing. The heavens, the angels, the stars. Even in the Bible, angels and stars are referred to synonymously sometimes. They're not saying angels are physically stars, but stars are an image for the angelic and vice versa, even in the biblical authors. So yeah, whenever you see that word tingling, keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Sure. Did anybody else need to see? I don't want to go past this stuff too fast. So if there is a slide and you want to re-see it or screenshot it or something, don't hesitate to let me know.
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know if I fell asleep or what, but I just don't quite understand what you're talking about with that medieval worldview and how that plays into what we're going to be reading. I understand about hell being at the center and looking up at the stars, but does he take this worldview in the novel?
Yes and no. He is what he's trying to do is show that, we're going to talk about this in a second, is that the planets, the ancients weren't dummies. They were picking up on something innate to how God created things. And even in the most pagan beliefs, Lewis said there are always like some kind of echoes or fingerprints of God. So, but it's distorted. It's bent, as he's going to say in this series. And so the biggest way that this model is going to come out is when he starts for the first novel is the theme is going to be Mars. Mars is going to dominate this book. The second book is going to be Venus. The third book is going to be Jupiter. And knowing the medieval model and what we're about to talk about is going to help you catch these references or these concepts as he's introducing them into his novel that is set in our world, our universe. In the Ransom Trilogy, the planets go around the sun. He doesn't take the geography of the ancient world, the medieval model. He takes the theology of the medieval model. So that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to introduce, how do I recapture the theology, the philosophy, and the ethics that the ancients rightly grasped and incorporate it into the modern age of rocketry, the age we live in, where we know that space is cold and vast and unfriendly to life. How do I bring these two things together? And that's what he's going to set out to do. So this next part we're going to get into, I think this is going to be the crux of it. But are there any other questions? That's a good question. We're going to unpack that as this whole thing goes over the next 6 weeks. Are there any other questions before we move on?
Does it seem to you that he's sort of marrying spiritual with, I want to say material because it's so much more than material, but with matter and energy? I mean, so that there's one instead of like a spiritual reality versus a physical reality. Does it seem?
Yeah, that's exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to re-enchant. He's trying to take the view of materialism, which just says the supernatural doesn't exist, and if it does, it's irrelevant. That's going to be Weston's worldview in the novel. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to take that and say that's actually from the devil. That's completely wrong. That all of creation is God's creation. And that, yeah, so he's definitely trying to do that for sure. Okay, this is going to be, again, I don't want to over caveat everything, but tonight, drinking from a fire hose, and it's okay. In the discarded image, this is what it comes down to. The planets were seen as influencing what happens on Earth. Not just the planets, but the stars. Now, in its most pagan form, this is astrology. It's horoscopes. It's the gods, the Greco-Roman gods, or the Babylonian gods, or the Assyrian gods. In its most sinful and twisted form, that's what it is. But for Lewis, again, he and J.R. Tolkien, they believe that even in the most twisted and bent and wrong religion, there was still some element of truth. It's distorted, it's twisted, it's marred, but it's not completely wrong. And he says it, I think in Mere Christianity, he says in math, there's only one right answer, and there are infinite number of wrong answers, but some wrong answers are much closer to being right than other wrong answers. And so in the medieval model, he's going to try to use it because it dominates ancient literature. And Lewis loved ancient literature. Before he was even a Christian, he loved medieval literature. He loved the things that he believed were fairy tales and made up. He absolutely loved that stuff. Even before he could explain why, he was moved to tears by tales of dying and rising again gods. He talks about, he heard the phrase, Baldur the Beautiful is dead, and it made him cry, and he didn't even know who Baldur the Beautiful was. There was something in the artistry of literature that moved him at a level that he couldn't put into words. He and Tolkien and others, they would talk about it later as Sehnsucht, It means longing. It's like an aching for something that's so beautiful you can't put it into words, and you don't even know why. Like when people say, "I don't know why I'm crying," when they see something that's just overwhelmingly beautiful or touching, and they can't explain it, and it can be so random. But for Lewis, it was the ancients and their world and how they thought, or their conception of the cosmos. So anyway, in The Discarded Image, on pages 91 through 94, he boils it all down. He explains the planets all had personalities. That's the biggest thing. The planets had personalities. And what Lewis is going to do is try to take those personalities and say, what is the seed of possible truth that they could be carrying? And if you take away the concept of pagan gods, but still keep the concept of the notions, the emotions, the influences of the heavens or whatever, what would that look like? What would a Christianized version look like? Now, for J.R. Tolkien, it looked like the Maiar and the you get the Silmarillion, the heavenly beings that the people of Middle Earth, they didn't worship, but they revered as coming from the one creator god, Iluvatar. And so that was how Tolkien did it. So Tolkien's figures were based on the Greco-Roman gods. Lewis is going to do the same thing that Tolkien does in Middle Earth. He's going to do it in the Ransom Trilogy. But he's going to do it with these creatures that he calls the Eldila. And they are going to be these angelic influences. Each of the spheres, each of the planets had its own personality, its own quality. So knowing this goes a long way to understanding and picking up the symbolism, not just in the Ransom Trilogy, but also in Narnia. Because as Michael Ward and I talked about when he was on a couple of months ago, all 7 Narnia books are patterned after these 7 heavens. These planets, each Narnia book corresponds to a different planet. Ward's made the case in his book, Planet Narnia, and every Lewis scholar I know who's like a legit literary critic, not historians or biographers, but like actually, I have not met one who's like, that's just conjecture. Like all of them are pretty much like, yeah, Lewis has very specifically done this. And Michael Ward was the one, it was his PhD thesis about 15 years ago. But here, just so you have an idea of the personalities of the planets, Saturn was the outer one. Saturn was the 7th heaven. And this is in Dante too. You can read in Paradiso, he goes through these 7 heavens, and the people that Dante encounters in the heavens have these same qualities, or they're there because of these type of qualities or whatever. So just for shorthand, Saturn is the heaven of the contemplatives in Dante. And in the earth, each one of these planets was believed to produce a different metal, or it was associated with a different metal on the earth, like a different element. So it's what produces lead in the earth. And again, this is all what the ancients believe. Lewis doesn't believe this literally, but this is in their symbolic universe. Saturn was associated with lead. In men, he was associated with a melancholy complexion, history, disastrous events, sickness, old age. This is where our picture of Father Time with the scythe, the big sickle, is derived from old pictures of Saturn. So like fatal accidents, pestilence, treachery, or just ill luck in general. He's seen as the most terrible of the 7. Sometimes he's called the greater infortune, Infortuna Major. So this is how the ancients, when you talked about things going on, that's the Saturn influence. All right. Next in, you had Jupiter. Jupiter was associated with the metal tin. Today, we think of tin, like a tin roof or tin cans, but to the ancients, tin was the metal associated with Jupiter. He's the 6th heaven. He's the heaven of the wise and the just princes or rulers in Dante. He produces in the earth tin. I'm skimming through because we're going to come back to this, but the character he produces in men would now be very imperfectly expressed by the word jovial. So our English word jovial comes from Jove. Jove is Jupiter. And Lewis says it's not very easy to grasp. We may see it as kingly, but we must think of a king at peace, enthroned, taking his pleasure, serene. The jovial character is cheerful, festive, but temperate, tranquil, magnanimous. When this planet dominates, we may expect halcyon days and prosperity. He's the best planet and is called the greater fortune, Fortuna Major, kind of the opposite of Saturn. So this is going to be huge. All of these are going to have, by the way, Saturn, this is the last battle in Narnia. These things are all characterized the last battle. Jupiter characterizes the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in the Narnia series. Next, you come to Mars. Mars is the heaven of, in Dante, the martyrs, possibly because of the word martyr and the similar sounding martyr in Dante. There could have been a philological mistake, but either way, Mars is the planet of, we're going to talk more about this, the gladiator, the mercenary, the warrior, the knight, the one who battles, neither good nor evil, just martial. And our English word martial carries this connotation. We have an episode here at Disciple Dojo where I've talked about the martial arts and C.S. Lewis, and it's all about this first volume of the Ransom Trilogy and how Mars is so important in it. Below Mars, as we move in closer, we come to the fourth heaven, which is Sol. That's the sun. Mars's metal is iron, by the way. And this is Prince Caspian. In Prince Caspian, you see all of the Mars and martial imagery. Iron and wood were the two things that Mars was most associated with. And you see that everywhere in Caspian. Sol, the sun, this is the heaven of theologians and philosophers. Sol is the point at which the concordant between the mythical and the astrological nearly breaks down. Mythically, Jupiter is the king, but Sol produces the noblest metal, gold. This is important. As we get into the Out of the Silent Planet, they're going to talk about going to Malacandra to get sun's blood. That's the term they're going to use for gold. So keep this, it's not accidental. Sol produces the noblest metal, gold, is the eye of man of the whole universe. He makes men wise and liberal. Sol produces fortunate events. Sol dispels confusion and mists and is associated with clarity and crispness and brightness. This is Voyage of the Dawn Treader, by the way. That's the image that dominates that book in Narnia. We move further in. The third heaven is Venus. Venus was associated with copper in the ancient world. And in Dante, it's the penitent who loved greatly, but also lawlessly. That's who he encounters in this heaven. Venus is Fortuna Minor, the lesser fortune. So Jupiter is Fortuna Major, Venus Fortuna Minor. Venus was worshipped on Cyprus, and Cyprus was where copper was most associated with. So that's where copper is known as the Cyprian metal. Venus, Aphrodite. Our culture knows enough about Venus to pick up on the female imagery, the lushness. Her colors are gold and green. She produces in mortals beauty, amorousness, in history, fortune, and events. Venus is the feminine. Mars is the masculine. The second novel in the Ransom Trilogy, Paralandra, is going to be all about Venus. This first one is all about Mars. Next one's going to be all about Venus. In The Magician's Nephew is the Narnia book that is centered around this idea of love and devotion and life and fertility and abundance that Aslan sings into being and all of the stuff. Mercury then, the second heaven. Mercury's metal is mercury. It's easy to remember. If you ever broken a thermometer and played with mercury, Lewis actually said the best way to think about the personality that Mercury was believed to have among the ancients was to take some real mercury in a saucer and play with it for a few minutes. It's where we get our term mercurial. Somebody has a mercurial personality. It had skilled eagerness, bright alacrity. He's trying to come up with something to communicate what Mercury connoted. To the ancients, Mercury was the one that involved language. And Mercury was also, for some reason, and I'm not clear on why, but for some reason, Mercury was associated with twins, and particularly with twins being reunited, or people who finding themselves in another, like that bond coming back together. It's a strange. You'd have to go down a bunch of medieval rabbit trails to figure out why it got that connotations, but it's everywhere in The Horse and His Boy. In Narnia is the concepts of language and literally twins and coming back, like meeting, being reunited, and all of that dominates The Horse and His Boy. And then lastly, we come to Luna, the moon. And the moon is associated with the metal silver. It's the first heaven. In Dante, it's where those who left convent life for justifiable reasons, it's where they ended up. So like nuns who decided not to be nuns and ended up getting married or whatever. But the important thing is at Luna, we cross in our descent the great frontier. So Luna, the moon sphere, was what separated ether from air. So on our side of everything, we have air. But above the moon, outside of the moon, was the realm of the ether. The ethereal, that's where that word comes from. It's where we move from heaven down. As we go in, we move into nature. So from the realm of the gods, or in a Christian conception of it, from the realm of the angels down to that of the demons. From the realm of necessity to the contingents, from incorruptible to the corruptible. So things that are sublunary, that's things that are mutable. They happen in the mutable realm, the changing realm. It's not like the crystalline heavens where everything's perfect. Not like the translunary world where nothing grows or decreases. And so in men, the moon was seen to produce wandering. It may make somebody a traveler, like wanting what we would call wanderlust, like wanting to travel. Or it may also produce wandering of the wits, especially periodical insanity, which was first meant by the word lunacy. Our word lunatic comes from the moon, Luna. And it was believed to. So this is where, if you read one of my favorite books of Narnia is The Silver Chair. The Silver Chair. And it's all about, what do they do in the book? They are in the subterranean world. They are questioning who Aslan really is. Does he really exist? Their mind is being tempted to wander. It's all wet. There's water everywhere. Luna was associated with water because the moon affects the tides. So all of this symbolism, I think it's some of the strongest in Narnia in the Silver Chair. But this is also what's going to happen in Out of the Silent Planet. Notice the difference between Ransom on our side of the moon and then the change in his character when he crosses the moon. And then when he comes back, like that's going to play into how we're reading this book. Again, Lewis wrote about all this. You can read it in Discarded Image. And it's not like this was like a pet project of Lewis's. This was his core of what he taught as a professional scholar of medieval and Renaissance literature. This was the thing that he was the most interested in, was this concept. We don't know him from that. We know him as author of Screwtape, Mere Christianity. We think Aslan's cool because he's a lion and he's Jesus. But this is the thing that holds it all together for Lewis, is a Christianized version of the planetary model. And so Louis Marcos, he's a historian and a classicist author. He says it to try to explain this, how Lewis saw. He said, in the same way, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn draw silver, mercury, copper, tin, and lead out of the earth. That was what the ancients believed. They believed that those planets pulled this stuff from the elements of the earth and created these metals, these precious metals. In the same way, they also believed that the planetary bodies made men fickle or lunatics, thanks to the lunar influence, mercurial, amorous, jovial, thanks to Jove, another name for Jupiter, and melancholy, or perhaps you might say Saturnine. That's not to say that the medieval church condoned horoscopes and fortune telling, but she did accept the interrelatedness of the changing world below and the unchanging world above. And that's a key. You're going to see this in Out of the Silent Planet. You're going to see it in Paralandra, and it's at the most prominent in That Hideous Strength, that the angelic beings, which our fallen, bent, worldly philosophers misconstrued as gods, you're going to find out how they affect people this side of the lunar border, this side of the fall, shall we say. So Lewis tells people to think of it this way. In every period, the model of the universe is accepted by the great thinkers. Which is accepted by the great thinkers, helps to provide what we may call a backcloth for the arts. So Lewis says every period of history, how people think about the universe is the background for the art that they produce. Makes sense. So he says, our own backcloth contains plenty of Freud and a little of Einstein. So in Lewis's day, in the 20th century, Freud was like the end-all, be-all. Everything could be explained by Freud. Everything is because you're secretly in love with your mother, or you weren't breastfed, or you know, everything's about sex, or what. And so you saw that in the art of the 20th century, in the literature of the 20th century, in the songs of the 20th century. And Einstein, who was a new kid on the block back when Lewis was writing this, he was already making waves. Einstein, relativity changed the way people saw the world. So that's the backcloth of modern thinking and modern art. He says the medieval backcloth contained the order and the influences of the planets. So the way we think of things like Einstein, space-time, relativity, string theory, all of these things, we may not even know the details of. We don't know the details of, most of us, but they form how we think about things like the Big Bang. We think about, blood moons and meteor showers. It just forms how we think of the world. So if we're going to write a science fiction novel, we would take into account things like light speed, relativity, different galaxies, all those things, because that's our worldview. So Lewis is saying for the ancients, they had a different worldview. And one of the major points is that Lewis wants to depict the sublunar siege. How do you incorporate a view of the fall? How do you incorporate Genesis 3 into the medieval model? In the ancient conception, the moon marks the divide. This is Christiana Hale. She says the moon marks the divide between the cold, deathly realm, ours, and the realm of light and life. The medievals believed that only the created order beneath the moon has been affected by the fall. Everything above the moon sphere is perfect and unfallen, still singing the praises of the Lord as it has since its creation, the music of the spheres. But while the heavens are full of dancing and the music of the spheres, beneath the moon, all is silent. When it comes to praise, when it comes to things being the way they're, because Lewis is going to suggest that on this side is where the bent one has put creation under siege through the fall. And so he says in this card image, we watch the spectacle of the celestial dance from its outskirts. Our highest privilege is to imitate it in such measure as we can. The medieval model is, if we may use the word, anthropoperipheral. That's a fun word that he just coined. What it means is we are creatures of the margin. In the medieval model, while the earth is geographically the center, again, theologically, we're on the margins because God is on that side of what's fallen and what's corrupt. Hence, for the ancients to look out on the night sky with for moderns to look out on the night sky with modern eyes is like looking out over a sea that fades away into mist, or looking about one in a trackless forest. Trees forever and no horizon. So that's how moderns think of, you look at the sky, it's just eternal. It just fades off into nothingness. We can't even see. It's just infinite stars and galaxies and darkness. And it's, he says to look up at the towering medieval universe is much more like looking at a great building, specifically a cathedral. The space of modern astronomy may arouse terror or bewilderment or vague reverie. But the spheres of the old present us with an object in which the mind can rest, overwhelming in its greatness, but satisfying in its harmony. That's a key that he's going to try to show in the Ransom Trilogy. How do you show that God is overwhelming in his greatness and yet not be overwhelmed with terror? How can you have comfort in a God? Does he even care about us? So this is what you're getting. This is a famous woodcut you have on this side of, there's the moon and there's the sphere, and the person is looking out, and out into it are the brightness. There's a wheel within a wheel. There's a nod to Ezekiel. This is the firmament that he's looking past, and he's looking into the heavenly realm. That's what Lewis is going to try to capture in all of this. So the last question, and then we'll take a break for questions. But the last question, and this is one that Christians will usually come to. Okay, so what's going on? Is this pagan astrology? Did Lewis reject modern science? What does all of this mean? I love Jesus, and I don't want to believe in crazy woo-woo crystals and spirit stuff and all that. So some get a little nervous here. What it is you have two worldviews that Lewis is rejecting in favor of a third one that he and his colleague Tolkien were the most staunch advocates of. So you had pagan astrology. This is a bent and a distorted, fallen, sinful depiction of whatever truth. It's like the telephone game that's 1 million people long. And by the time it gets from one end to the other, the message is completely garbled. Maybe there's something original from it, but it's mostly gibberish. So you have that. And then you have modern science, which has no room for, and Lewis modern science, 20th century. I'm not talking about 21st, but 20th century. In Lewis's day, modern science, which just said, oh, we've pretty much figured out everything. And, there's a little bit of edges we have to clean up, but for the most part, we figured it all out, and there's no room for God. There's no need for God. So this is the view of like H.G. Wells. So in distinction to both of these, you have what Lewis is trying to present, which is the true myth. He believes that the gospel, and this is what Tolkien and Hugo Dyson convinced him of on that famous walk, Addison's walk in Oxford, on that night when the wind was blowing and they were talking and they stayed up all night. And this was like Lewis, this was a turning point in his life. They convinced him, hey, Jack, the reason you like all these old myths and these old stories of like Norse mythology or Greco-Roman gods, the reason that those move you is because there's something in them that's actually an echo of what is actually true. And the gospel is that truth. The gospel is the true myth. It does what all the others claim to do, but in a non-distorted way. That's what Lewis is going to be presenting. So for David Downing notes, for Lewis, paganism was an anticipation, Christianity, the fulfillment. He elaborated on this view in a letter to Don B. Griffiths, his former student. This is what Lewis said. Paganism does not merely survive, but first becomes really itself in the very heart of Christianity. This is very much what Paul was saying when he went to Athens and he was moved in his guts by the religiousness of the Athenians. And then he saw the monument to the unknown God. And he said, let me tell you about this unknown God. And then he proceeded to preach the gospel, quoting hymns to Zeus. He quoted a hymn by Aratus and one by Epimenides of Crete, both of which were originally written to Zeus. We are his offspring. That was about Zeus. In him we live and move and have our being. That was about Zeus. Paul was able to take both of those pagan hymns at a pagan shrine and say, you've been longing for the real thing. Let me tell you about it. Lewis is doing that in the Ransom Trilogy. So the good news is if you're a Christian, you don't have to get freaked out by him incorporating the elements of the planets and the martial spirit and the Saturnian influence and the jovial, all of these qualities. Like it's okay. He's intentionally doing it. Christiana Hale says, where many readers stumble through the trilogy in a fog of disconnected themes and seemingly meaningless characters, there is, in fact, a deep underlying unity in the trilogy, one that can be fully understood only through the lens of medieval thought and literature. The Ransom Trilogy's importance in the canon of Lewis's writings is, I believe, difficult to overstate. It's a synthesis of Lewis's ongoing project of exploring the imaginative and emotional effects of the medieval cosmology and the different ways these effects can be utilized in literature. We need to read and study this trilogy because it's Lewis's first foray, and remember, this is one of his earliest writings, into demonstrating how the medieval model retains value even in the modern world. And the great line, one of my favorite lines from Voyage of the Dawn Treader, is when Ramandu, who is a star, who's a retired star, is talking to Eustace. And Eustace tells him, in our world, said Eustace, a star is a huge ball of flaming gas. And I love Ramandu's line. He says, even in your world, my son, that's not what a star is, but only what it's made of. So Lewis is going to try to tell us in the Ransom Trilogy not how the universe, what it is, or not what it's made of, rather. He's going to try to tell us what it is. And that's a tall order. Okay, let's, I see a hand. Loretta Spangler.
Yes, I caught a glimpse of your slide 33 when you skipped over it. And the glimpse I caught seemed to me like it might address a question that's in the chat.
Okay, yeah, I can't see the chat, so go ahead.
The question is from someone else, and it says, in the spheres, it would seem that Saturn, that beautiful planet with its rings, is closest to the firmament and thus closest to God. Why then would it be associated with such terrible thing? So the little bit I saw on 33 seemed like it was apropos.
Yeah. Born under Saturn, you're qualified to become either a mope and a malcontent or a great contemplative. This is how the planets worked, is they weren't just one. Remember, the planets, I've got a slide that addresses this. Christiana Hale says, remember, the planets exist in an unfallen realm. The medievals believed that only the creation under the moon was subject to the consequences of the fall. Hence, the planets and their personalities are not tainted by sin. Yet the influences which are powerful enough to penetrate the lunar barrier could be corrupted on Earth, since Earth is located in the sublunar realm of disease and decay. The idea is what the ancients, they believed that the planets just were, and they had effect for good or for ill based on who they were affecting. So and this isn't going to be in the trilogy, the influence on Ransom is going to be different than the influence on Weston. It's going to be the same thing. They're both going to be on Malacandra. But how they are reacting and responding is going to be based on the type of person that they are, and particularly the moral person that they are, the type of choices that they make, the place, the worldview that they hold, basically. So, Saturn, the other thing to remember is, too, we look at Saturn and we see the beautiful rings, but that's because we have telescopes. Before telescopes, there was no idea that Saturn had rings. It had two blobby things. When Galileo first turned his telescope up to it, he saw these two blobby things, and then sharper imagery revealed, those are the rings. But Saturn wasn't as beautiful. It was faint. It wasn't as bright as Jupiter. It was much further away. It was more faint. It was weaker. It was paler, and it was slower. It took a lot more time. And of course, they didn't even know about Uranus or Neptune. So yeah, you have to kind of jettison everything we know of about the planets with the aid of technology and think about them through the minds of the medievals. Yeah, we're going to talk about the planets because Lewis very much saw them, and in that hideous strength, actually in Paralandra, in Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and in that hideous strength, the planets each are going to be embodied by their archon, their representative, their Oyarsa. And again, if this is your first time, I'm not going to get ahead of ourselves, but the planets, we're going to meet the planets basically, and not just the physical planets, but the personalities that govern them. We're going to meet all of them, or we're going to meet 3 or 4 of them. Okay, you guys all read, did you get a chance to read the Religion and Rocketry essay?
Yes.
Okay. That can be found in his book, The World's Last Night, if you want to actually own it, or you can just anywhere free online. But what were your thoughts on that? Let me hear from you guys a little bit. What were your thoughts on reading? Now, he wrote Religion and Rocketry in 1958, so this is 20 years after he wrote Out of the Silent Planet. What were some of your thoughts in reading it?
I thought it was mind-blowing. Like, it's just, wow. I just kept saying, wow, wow.
Is that Sue? Yeah, in what way? Elaborate a little bit on that, or have your cat elaborate on it for us.
Sorry.
No, I love it. What's your cat's name?
Teddy Wood.
Teddy Wood.
Jerk face. Yeah. One of the things one sentence I think really stood out to me was, oh my gosh, how did it go? Something about, what if we weren't the only galaxy that Jesus died for? I'm probably getting that paraphrase wrong, but I was walking while I was listening to it on YouTube, and I just kind of stopped in my tracks. I was like, wow. Like, it was just, yeah, it was crazy. I never thought of any of those things. So it really stretched my brain in so many ways.
Yeah, it's a thought experiment for sure. Because the question that people, has anybody seen the Spielberg movie? What's it called? Disclosure Day? Or it's a recent, like it just came out, and it was about, they find aliens exist. And so then it causes people all kinds of, I think Spielberg or somebody who was associated with it said, this is going to cause all kinds of uproar among people of faith. Or there was a convening of, so much of what's in the news is just nonsense, but apparently there was a convening at the White House of pastors to prepare them for the possibility of aliens that the government had found. There was just stuff like that on social media, and it's all been within the past 6 months. And I just thought, Lewis wrote about this like 70 years ago. This is not new. There's nothing about this is new. It's not like Christians haven't been grappling with, what would it be like if we found life on another planet? And so this essay was one that, but you'd be surprised how many Christians have never heard of this essay, never read it before. What were other people's thoughts reading it?
I agreed with the point that he made, that if we have an opportunity to meet other life, we'll do what we can to destroy it.
Yeah, that was such a heavy theme. He was not optimistic about it. In fact, he says, I love this. He says, to exchange with the inhabitants of other worlds that especially keen and rich affection which exists between unlikes, it's a glorious dream. But make no mistake, it is a dream. We are fallen. We know what our race does to strangers. He's looking at history. He lived through 2 world wars, served in one, wrote during the height of the other one. He has no reason to think that. Remember, the 2 world wars, World War I and World War II, were pretty much what killed Christianity in Europe as a cultural thing, as a respectable thing. I mean, there's still Christians, obviously, in Europe, but for the most part, it was like this progress. The world is getting better. Boom, 20th century. The most technologically advanced century in all of human history, and the highest body count in all of human history. And Lewis was, he was very pessimistic in it.
Kind of curious to hear your reaction to his comments about the scope of the fall as far as cosmic versus here on where it's Earth or like Milky Way. Kind of made a comment about because of the vast distances between galaxies, that's sort of a built-in triage mechanism.
Yeah,
How
he
I read
says
it.
Yeah, right here at the end, he says, "But let us thank God that we're still very far from travel to other worlds. I've wondered before now whether the vast astronomical distances may not be God's quarantine precautions. They prevent the spiritual infection of a fallen species from spreading." And it's a very interesting thought. I feel I don't know if I would be as pessimistic as Lewis. I feel like he hints at this, though. He says, wherever man's destruction is gone, there have been missionaries that have come along and they've done good things. I think good and evil kind of have grown together. My own personal thoughts are good and evil. Like, the world is not worse now than it ever was. We just hear more bad things because of media and the ability to read global news in an instant. But I feel like there are things that are as good as they've ever been in history right now, but there are also things that are as bad as they've ever been in history right now. And I feel like both of those things are growing together, just like Jesus' parable of the wheat and the weeds, let them grow together. And at the harvest, the workers will come and separate. I think that's applicable. I mean, he was talking about the kingdom of God. I think that's applicable beyond that. I think good's going to get better and evil's going to get worse. And so if you extrapolate that out to space travel, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos sending entrepreneurs to the moon, I mean, I kind of see what you've done on Earth, and I don't really trust you to be altruistic when it comes to other worlds. But at the same time, you see what happens, wherever humanity is gone, good and bad have come along with it. So I do think the vast distances, I think it's just, unless trans-dimensional travel, warp speed is a reality, there's just physically no way we can reach another star at all. I mean, tens of thousands of years just to get people there, and then everything has to be exact. I mean, life is so finely tuned on Earth that to export that to another world, unless it has the exact specifications of Earth, it's like you take your first breath, you're going to die. Like, life on Mars is just one giant planet trying to kill you relentlessly. So I like what Lewis has thought, that, and I could see this as a possibility of God being like, you guys aren't ready. I've got a whole universe I've created that since Adam and Eve's fall, I'm going to keep y'all here. I think it's possible. Any other comments on the religion?
I found he said, Christians seem to forget that the incarnation seem to think that the incarnation implies some particular merit or excellence in humanity. But of course, it implies just the reverse. No creature that deserved redemption would need to be redeemed.
Yes.
That just sort of jumped out, and it's like, wow.
Totally agree.
Yeah. It's a good point when people start talking, especially in public discourse, when pundits and preachers on TV and people start talking, they just assume that Christians think that God cares about the earth because we're so good. And so I think Lewis does a good job of saying, no. And I think this trilogy is going to hammer that point home, that like, no, you're not good. And that's not why God cares about you. There's something else going on.
I think that one thing that stood out to me was when he spoke about sending missionaries to unfallen lands and worlds.
Yeah.
And just to think that could be motivated by wanting to save, or could be motivated by like just this self-righteousness, like we're right, we know what's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was
like wanting to infect them.
Mm-hmm. I thought I had it, but right here. Yeah. I love this question he asks. He says, would all our missionaries recognize an unfallen race if they met it? Could they? Would they continue to press upon creatures that did not need to be saved, that plan of salvation which God has appointed for man? Would they denounce as sins mere differences of behavior, which the spiritual and biological history of these strange creatures fully justified and which God himself has blessed? Would they try to teach those from whom they had better learn? I do not know. And this is, you can see him taking a shot across the bow at colonial missionaries. At the British Empire sent tons of missionaries, but frequently, and the Catholic Church too. I mean, it's not just British, but they would send missionaries to places, and the missionaries, first thing they do, oh, you got to start dressing like us. Pictures of missionaries here in Americas taking native kids and putting them into the boarding schools and cutting their hair that had significance that wasn't wrong, but no, we've got to civilize you. He's definitely taking shots at that drive among missionaries throughout history. And I think it's fair. I think it's a fair shot to take.
It is a little funny. And I know I love C.S. Lewis. I'm not, but think of it, a fallen man creating a world where people aren't fallen is, he had to get the irony of that while he was doing it. And I think he did a wonderful job.
Yeah. He wrestles with he wrestles with how do you present that? How do you, and you're going to see this in his interactions with a character later in the book. You're going to see that interacting with an unfallen culture, and also questions for what is it? How could you have death in a world that's unfallen? What would that mean? And we know that through sin, death came to all men because all have sinned. So we know that for man, death was not plan A, but we don't know for other creatures that it was. Like that, those questions are going to be raised as we're reading. This is probably Lewis's most pessimistic, and this is going to be a shocking poem, but I want to share it. And we're all adults, so the imagery is going to be uncomfortable, but it fits most people, even people that have read Religion and Rocketry, may not have read Prelude to Space, an epithalamium. Epithalamium is a poem on the occasion of a wedding. And this is how Lewis compares. I want you to this is visceral. So I would say if you had kids in the room, you could tell them to leave. But this is the image Lewis uses for, now he wrote this, it's not exactly clear what year, to my knowledge, that he wrote this. It was published, I think, after he died in a collection of poems. So the latest this would have been written is 1963, but he probably wrote it long before that. So late 50s. Now think about what's going on. This is the space age. This is the American and Russian space race. This is the, trying to dominate outer space, splitting the atom, testing the hydrogen bombs. Who can make the bigger bomb? Who can make the rockets that go the furthest? This is the world he lives in. So Lewis writes this. He says, so man, grown vigorous now, holds himself ripe to breed, daily devises how to ejaculate his seed and boldly fertilize the black womb of the unconsenting skies. He's comparing rocket launching and the constant rocket launching to rape. That's the image that's going to be used in this, the rape of the universe. As men, these men, manliness, masculine, what do men want to do? They want to spread their seed. Yeah, he's not pulling punches in this. He says, some now alive expect, I am told, to see the large steel member grown erect, turgid with the fierce charge of our whole planet's skill, courage, wealth, knowledge, concentrated will. A rocket. He's talking about a rocket and comparing it to a male member, straining with lust to stamp our likeness on the abyss. Bombs, gallows, Belsen camp, that's a concentration camp, Bergen-Belsen, pox, polio, Tias' kiss, or Judas's, Moloch's fires, and Torquemada's, sons resemble sires. Torquemada was the Grand Inquisitor. He's saying this is what this is what we're straining to send out into the cosmos. Shall we, when the grim shape roars upward, dance and sing? Yes, if we honor rape, if we take pride to fling so bountifully on space the sperm of our long woes, our large disgrace. That's PG-13 stuff that C.S. Lewis was writing, but this shows he saw the universe as not something to be dominated, not something to be exploited. We don't know how long after he wrote Out of the Silent Planet he wrote this, but it was during the space race. And he was one of the voices saying, look at what we've done here before we start getting all enamored about this beautiful bliss, future, noble, all of that rhetoric that was flying around during the 60s, the promise of utopia. I mean, it's back now. Listen to Elon or Jeff talk about what space travel is going to do and life on Mars and setting up a colony on the moon. I mean, it's come back around. The same stuff that Lewis was wrestling with. So this poem it shows a side of him that most people don't see because most people don't read Lewis's poems. But yeah, I don't know. How does that change? Does this color now between religion and rocketry and this, does it change anything about how, I don't know, how does this sit with people?
Would have seen him as this literary scholar, not someone, well, frankly, he's more truthful and honest and raw than I would have.
Yeah.
I didn't have any concept of that.
Raw is a good word for this poem. Religion. So you can tell the audience. But now, by the way, C.S. Lewis did not publish this poem. This is one of his poems that was published after he died. So we're getting Lewis unfiltered in this poem. And that's important to realize. I mean, it's not like he was like, hey, Time Magazine, I got a great poem. Let me put this, no, he's not like getting this out there. But I think it's so important because it gives us a window into what he actually thought in a more unfiltered manner. And then religion and rocketry, we get, this is something that he published and wrote when asked. And so this is like the more polished version. And Out of the Silent Planet is putting the idea out there for the first time. And doing it in a way that's, so this is his attempt at doing something in the world of literature. This is his attempt, the religion and rocketry, at doing something in the world of news or media or pop culture. And then this poem is him unfiltered, like in his own, raw is the best way to put it. Before we move on, let me scan the chat real quick. For context, Yuri Gagarin, first man in space, 1961. Yeah. Lewis lived to see a man in space, not a man on the moon. He died in 1963. He died the same day Kennedy died, so his death was overshadowed. Anything? Oh, Sadie mentioned putting on her tinfoil hat about aliens being demons. The Great Deception. I'm not sure of that specific conspiracy theory. I know that's a name of it, but demons presenting as aliens. Yeah, that's actually nothing new. Hugh Ross has written about that for the 20-something years. I think his book was something in Little Green Men. I don't remember, but it was all about like if demons were to interact, they would present themselves as beings from another planet. Lewis is going to touch on that in this. He's not gonna rule out that there are. He's gonna basically talk about the demonic affects our nature on Earth, so it would affect wherever else it's allowed to be as well, and that's what it'll touch on that in this one. It'll really come to a head in That Hideous Strength, the third one. All right. Before we look at themes, I'm actually going to, just to show you next week, we're going to talk more about Lewis's cosmic character, the planets, because not everybody could be here tonight. So we're going to start next week by looking at another of Lewis's poems. It's actually called The Planets. He wrote it in 1935. So before he wrote this trilogy, he had already written about the planets and the medieval model. And this is a key, not just to this trilogy, but also to Narnia as well. So we're going to talk about next week. We'll start out with that, but I want to end with some themes to give you for as we're reading. So as you're reading along, the first theme, the biggest theme to keep in mind in the first book is going to be fear. Keep in mind, especially reread if you need to, chapters 1 and 2, the relationship between Ransom and fear, because it's going to be important. And it's also going to be mixed, but Ransom's going to go on a journey. Then another theme you're going to see is philology. Ransom, the character, is J.R. Tolkien. He is a patently transparent. Lewis and Tolkien made an agreement. They both said, you know what, why don't we write the kind of stories we want to read? And so they agreed. And in the preface, you can, if you read the, J.R. Tolkien wrote the preface to this, or the foreword rather. And in the foreword, they talk about, he says we originally meant to each to write an excursionary thriller, a space journey his and a time journey mine, each discovering myth. Now, by myth, he means the true myth, the idea that what's been echoed throughout all of the myths in history has its fulfillment in the gospel. That's what they set out to do. But the space journey has been finished, and owing to my slowness and uncertainty, the time journey remains only a fragment, as you know. And he's talking about his book that got published after his death by his son Christopher, The Lost Road. So if you have the history of Middle-earth and you read The Lost Road and other writings, The Lost Road is the beginning of what Tolkien wanted to do, which is a journey through time. Lewis's responsibility was to do the journey through space, and Lewis did it, and Tolkien loved it. Tolkien didn't love Narnia. I mean, he liked it. It's overblown how much he hated Narnia. He really didn't like some things about Narnia, but he still gave copies of Narnia to like kids and stuff. Like Tolkien, but he didn't love it. Narnia wasn't his jam, but he loved Out of the Silent Planet. And so reading his thing at the beginning, Lewis makes his character Ransom a transparent depiction of Tolkien. He's a philologist. He puts him at Cambridge rather than Oxford, but you're going to see themes of philology when he gets to Malacandra. He's going to have a very specific interest in wording. You're going to see terms, these don't mean anything to you yet, but you're going to see Malacandrian words like hross and handramit and harandra. These are actually derived from Old Norse words for horse, lowlands, and highlands. And Tolkien and Lewis were Norse buddies, and Lewis and Tolkien especially loved Norse. And so as a nod to Tolkien, Lewis he flexes his philology muscles. Another theme you're going to see over the course of the book is masculinity, true masculinity. You're going to see it in its distorted forms. Weston is one form of distorted masculinity. Divine is another form of distorted masculinity. And we're going to talk about Divine and Weston both next week. You're also going to see it in the setting. I'll read this quote. Colin Smothers wrote an essay in Life on the Silent Planet about masculinity and martialness. He says, the medievals assigned a planetary symbol to Mars, a circle with an arrow representing a spear at an erect 45-degree angle. Today, the universal symbol for the male sex. So the circle with the arrow coming out of it, that's the symbol for male. That is the ancient symbol for Mars. It's an erect spear with all of the connotations that implies. He says the problem of so-called toxic masculinity is not masculinity itself, but to what end it is deployed. Weston embodies masculine vice in his megalomaniacal quest of scientific inquiry and advancement, no matter who or what stands in his way. Divine is a partner in crime, out for the Martian gold, sun's blood, that occurs on the planet in abundance. What Lewis is going to present is Martianity. Martianity is mature masculinity, the disciplined warrior enlisted in the cause of righteousness, who's fearless and courageous, even to the point of death on behalf of his beloved. Bravery, after all, is what commends one to Maleldil. If you don't know who that is yet, you will. Ransom is most Christ-like when he is most manly, most courageous for others. Any man would do well to embrace the same for his beloved. And then he makes this line, in a world increasingly unwilling to say what a woman is, let alone a man, but nevertheless certain it is masculinity that lies at the root of so many societal ills, Lewis presents a thrilling, compelling vision of a masculinity that can save the world. So you're going to see that a lot, and take notice of it. Now, ladies, it's cool because the second book is going to be femininity. So first he's got to go to Mars, then he's going to go to Venus. So just keep that in mind if you're like, oh, there's so much masculine imagery. Yes, but it's intentional. The other theme to keep in mind is creation stewardship. You're going to see the difference between how Ransom is going to come to see his place in the universe versus how Weston and Devine see theirs. And it's going to be really important. You're also going to see the theme of discipleship, becoming a true disciple. Ransom is not an unbeliever, but he is a bit of a skeptic at first. He's a churchman, but not a committed disciple. By the end of the third book, night and day. And that's kind of the course of his hero's journey over these novels. The last theme to keep in mind is the theme of apocalypsis. Apocalypsis means unveiling. This is where we get the word apocalypse. This is the first word of the Greek text of the book of Revelation, and it literally means to lift the veil. Ransom is going to have his entire world turned upside down and his entire conception of the cosmos, not the geographical cosmos. He's still going to be on planets revolving around the sun, but on the theological cosmos. And that's what this book is going to do. It's going to lift the veil on how we look at everything. And one of the big points that's going to come into play is the incarnation did not affect mankind alone. It changed the shape of reality, the entire cosmos. We're going to see that the reverberations of the cross did not stop at the sphere of Luna, but they go out into the whole cosmos. And Ransom is going to come to realize that. But let me just read you this poem. We got to end with this. I know we're going a little bit over, but we got to end with this. This is a great poem. He wrote this in 1948, thick of World War II, or World War II, 48 was just after, yeah? When did World War II was 38, 45 World War II ended. So right after World War II. This is the end of the poem. It's a longer poem, but it's collected in his book of poems. It's called The Turn of the Tide. We got to end with this because this is so cool. And I'm somebody who grew up hating poetry, by the way, so take that for what it's worth. But listen, this is at the end of this long poem, and he says, this is the last stanza, since the Word first founded the abyss, and notice word is capitalized, since the Word first founded the abyss, but this time it was changed in a mystery estranged, a paradox and ambiguous bliss. Heaven danced to it and burned. Such answer was returned to the hush, the fevete, the fear that earth had sent out. Revel, mirth, and shout descended to her, sphere below sphere. Catch that image? Saturn laughed and lost his latter age's frost. His beard, Niagara-like, unfroze. Monsters in the sun rejoiced, the inconstant one, the unwedded moon forgot her woes. A shiver of rebirth and deliverance on earth went gliding, her bonds were released. Into broken light, a breeze rippled and woke the seas. In the forest it startled every beast. Carapods fell to dance from Taprobon to France, leprechauns from down to Labrador. In his green Asian dell, the phoenix from his shell burst forth and was the phoenix once more. So this cacophony of all of these legendary and mythological beings and elements of creation and the planets, and they're all going I mean, even Saturn's having a good time. Like, it's just wild, right? What's the cause of all this? Here's the last lines. So death lay in arrest, but at Bethlehem the blessed, nothing greater could be heard than a dry wind in the thorn, the cry of the one newborn, and cattle in stall as they stirred. He's talking about the birth of Jesus. This little, insignificant baby crying in a stall of cattle, and nothing can be heard but a breeze blowing in the thorns. That is what all of creation and all of existence rejoices over. And he's got all of the planets lining up to celebrate this when God became man. It's so powerful. Like, I get choked up even reading it. Like, that's theology at its best. So we're going to unpack it in the Lewis trilogy. Yeah, if that doesn't get you excited to read the books, then I don't know what will. But hopefully, you've read 1 and 2 this week, chapters 1 and 2, and they are short chapters. Like, you can go back and reread it if you want to, and some of the stuff we thought about. But we just laid the groundwork. It really is going to kick off next week, and next week, read through chapter 6. So chapters 1 through 6. Next week, lecture part is done. I may pull up some slides every now and then. I'm going to walk through his poem on the planets because it's absolutely beautiful, and it really does flesh some of this out, and it's going to be a reminder of what we talked about. But read through chapter 6, and we're going to do a lot more this view overhead and walking through and pointing out some specific things. And even in chapters 1 and 2 that we just touched on, we're going to unpack those a little more. But like I said, this week we had to do the prolegomena. We had to set the stage. So any final questions before we dip out? Tammy said, say the name of the poem again. This poem is The Turn of the Tide, if that's the one you're referring to.
He was referring to Prelude to Space, and I put a link.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Yeah.
I'm the retired librarian, so I'm always putting the links in.
Oh, yes. You are on it. We're going to lean into that heavily then.
Feel free.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us for this first episode and first session, rather. Come next week, ready, eager, and we're going to really dig into some of these characters, especially Weston and Divine. That's how you say it, by the way. It's Divine, not Divine, to my knowledge. And my board will kill me if I don't at least say, if you aren't a monthly Disciple Dojo donor subscriber, consider becoming one. We're looking for $10 a month, and there's 50 people registered for this course, so that would really help us if everybody was a monthly supporter. But you don't have to be. This is entirely free, like all of our stuff. All right, you guys are awesome. We'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.